What if I told you there's a prison where guards allegedly smuggle in grenades and rival gang members fight deadly battles every day?
Our office will continue to be vigilant in prosecuting those who participate in violent gang activity. This isn't a new trend. Gangs have been around for centuries.
From chilling accounts of neglect at Julia Tutwiler Prison in the U.S. to the horrifying gang violence in Tamara Women's Prison, the stories behind these facilities will leave you speechless. Here are the 12 most dangerous female prison facilities in the world. 1. Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women, USA. This place has such a dark history that it's shocking. Back in 2003, there were about 992 inmates crammed in there, and it was so overcrowded and underfunded that a federal judge said it violated the U.S. Constitution. That's how bad the conditions were. The real horror is what came out in 2012 when a nonprofit called Equal Justice Initiative filed a complaint. They spoke to over 50 women and uncovered horrible stories of sexual violence by prison staff. This wasn't just one or two cases. It was frequent and severe. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice investigated and found proof of this abuse. The report detailed how the women lived in fear, surrounded by inappropriate behavior like guards watching them in showers or bathrooms, and even worse, some women were forced into sexual acts. And this had been going on for nearly 2 decades. Even after all these findings, nothing really changed. The prison system knew about the abuse and did nothing to fix it. Can you believe that? The governor announced in 2016 that the prison would close and new facilities would be built. But as of 2024, Julia Tutwiler Prison was still open. 2. HM Prison Bronzefield, UK. HM Prison Bronzefield is Europe's largest women's prison, and you'd think it would have top-notch facilities, right? But no. It's got its share of shocking stories. First off, it's a Category A prison, which means it houses some of the most dangerous women in the UK. It's run by a private company called Sodexo, and while it has about 140 officers, the conditions are anything but smooth. The prison has a mix of inmates, from those awaiting trial to those serving long sentences, and it even has a mother and baby unit for children up to 18 months old. Now, the healthcare there has been a complete disaster. In 2016, a woman named Natasha Chin died after vomiting for hours without medical attention. It turns out the staff didn't even respond to her cell bell because they didn't know the bells were broken. And this wasn't a one-off incident. Over the years, other women have died in similar ways, showing how neglected the healthcare system is. Then there's the horrifying case in 2019 when an 18-year-old gave birth alone in her cell. She pressed the emergency bell twice, but no one came. Her baby tragically died, and the incident exposed just how little care pregnant women get in this prison. People were outraged, and multiple investigations were launched, but the fact that this happened in the first place is heartbreaking. 3. Tipitapa Women's Prison, Nicaragua. Tipitapa Women's Prison in Nicaragua is infamous for its brutal conditions. It's not just a prison, it's a place where human rights seem non-existent. This facility is notorious for its harsh punishment methods. Even non-violent offenders face severe mistreatment, and violent inmates are often allowed to run wild, assaulting others without much interference. The lack of control and care from the authorities only makes things worse. Women here live in unsanitary conditions, with inadequate medical care that leaves them vulnerable to infectious diseases. These issues pose serious health risks, and the inmates are the ones who suffer the most. The prison is also overcrowded, which adds to the chaos. It's not uncommon to see women crammed into small spaces, struggling for basic necessities like food and water. The environment is dehumanizing, and many inmates feel forgotten by the outside world. 4. Lowell Correctional Institution, USA. Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida is one of the largest women's prisons in the U.S., but it's not known for being the best. In fact, it's infamous for its problems. Located in Marion County, north of Ocala, it houses nearly 3,000 inmates, ranging from teenagers to adults, including women on death row. It was the first all-female prison in Florida when it opened in 1956, but over time, its reputation has only gotten worse. The prison has a long history of abuse, neglect, and overcrowding. In 2015, the Miami Herald published an investigative series that revealed shocking misconduct, including cases of sexual abuse and inhumane treatment. Things got even worse during the COVID-19 pandemic, when nearly half of the inmates tested positive, and reports of overcrowding and lack of medical care flooded the news. Many inmates took to social media to share their experiences, describing the dire conditions. The facility is divided into multiple units, including a reception center, a work camp, and the annex, which houses high-security inmates and those needing special care. One particularly horrific case involved Cheryl Weimar, a 52-year-old inmate who was brutally beaten by officers in 2019, leaving her paralyzed. She later won a settlement, but the incident highlighted the systemic problems within Lowell. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, wait until you hear about a prison where rival gangs turn every day into a battlefield, with smuggled weapons and even grenades making their way inside. 5. Tamara Women's Prison, Honduras. Tamara Women's Prison in Honduras is like something out of a nightmare. It's supposed to hold about 400 women, but at one point, it had nearly double that. Overcrowding is just the beginning of its problems. This prison houses members of rival gangs like MS-13 and 18th Street, and if you know anything about these gangs, you know how dangerous that is. They've had violent clashes inside the prison, and it's gotten so bad that people have been killed. In 2023, there was a massive riot that left 46 women dead. Most of them were burned or shot. The prison isn't just overcrowded, it's corrupt. Inmates can bribe guards to smuggle in weapons, drugs, and even grenades. The government has tried to crack down on this, but it's not enough. After the riot, they declared a state of emergency and even announced plans to build a maximum security prison on a remote island. But honestly, these are just band-aid solutions. The real problem is the country's broken prison system, which reflects the larger issues of poverty, corruption, and gang violence in Honduras. 6. La Mesa Prison, Mexico. La Mesa Prison in Tijuana, Mexico, has a reputation that's as rough as it gets. It's one of the most notorious prisons in Latin America, and for good reason. Originally built for 2,000 inmates, it now houses over 7,000. This overcrowding creates a chaotic and dangerous environment. Corruption is rampant here. Guards have been known to take bribes in exchange for better conditions or even releasing prisoners. In the past, some inmates lived in luxury, with reports of condos being built inside the prison for those who could pay. These VIP cells were demolished in 2002, but the stories highlight just how deep the corruption runs. Violence is another major issue. Riots are frequent, often sparked by frustration over living conditions. In one incident in 2008, 19 inmates were killed after tensions boiled over when prisoners weren't given water following an earlier riot. These riots are terrifying for everyone involved and show how quickly things can spiral out of control in such a volatile environment. Despite all this, there's a story of hope here. Sister Antonia Brenner, a Catholic nun, chose to live inside the prison for over 30 years, providing care and support to the inmates. Known as the Prison Angel, she's a rare bright spot in an otherwise grim place. 7th Evin Prison, Iran. Evin Prison in Tehran, Iran, is infamous for holding political prisoners under horrifying conditions. Known as Evin University because of the number of intellectuals and students imprisoned there, it has been a hub for detaining government critics since it opened in 1972. The prison, originally built to house 320 inmates, has grown over the years to hold thousands, often in overcrowded and inhumane conditions. The prison's history is riddled with allegations of torture, abuse, and neglect. Female political prisoners in particular have reported severe mistreatment, including physical abuse and even sexual violence. A shocking revelation came in the 1980s when it was disclosed that young female prisoners were forced sexually before execution under the guise of religious law. The trauma these women endured is unimaginable. In more recent years, leaked footage in 2021 showed guards mistreating inmates, dragging elderly prisoners, and engaging in brutal acts. While Iran's prison authorities apologized, these actions underscored the deep-rooted issues at Evin. Protesters arrested during demonstrations, journalists, and even human rights activists often find themselves in its cells, facing lengthy detentions without fair trials. 8. Insein Prison, Myanmar. Insein Prison in Yangon, Myanmar, is notorious for its appalling conditions and history of brutal treatment of inmates. Built in 1887 during British colonial rule, it was initially meant to ease overcrowding in Rangoon's main jail. Today, it's infamous for housing political prisoners and being a site of abuse and torture. This prison's conditions are shocking. Overcrowding is a massive problem, with prisoners packed into unsanitary cells. Diseases run rampant, and medical care is almost non-existent. Inmates often die from untreated illnesses, and those who make it to the prison hospital face dirty needles and lack proper care. One former prisoner recalled having to bribe guards just to use the latrine. The torture methods are horrifying. Prisoners have been beaten with sand-filled rubber pipes, chased by dogs, and forced to crawl on gravel paths until their knees bled. Hunger strikes by inmates demanding basic rights like healthcare or family visits have been met with solitary confinement or even harsher punishments. Insein has also witnessed deadly violence. In 2008, over 100 prisoners were shot during a riot, with many others tortured afterward. A 2022 explosion at the prison killed 8 people, adding to its bloody history. If you think overcrowded cells are terrible, wait until you hear about a prison where political prisoners face torture, starvation, and are completely forgotten. It's even worse. 9. Black Beach Prison, Equatorial Guinea. Black Beach Prison in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, is one of the most feared facilities in Africa. Built during Spanish colonial rule in the 1940s, it was initially meant for common criminals, but later became a detention site for political opponents after the country gained independence in 1968. This prison is infamous for its brutal treatment of inmates. Female prisoners in particular face horrifying conditions, including torture, starvation, and denial of medical care. Food rations are meager, and many inmates suffer from malnutrition. The lack of proper sanitation and health care only worsens their plight. The prison is also known for its high-profile detainees. Political leaders, activists, and even mercenaries have been held here under harsh conditions. For example, during the rule of Francisco Macias Nguema, many of his political opponents were imprisoned and executed in Black Beach. His successor, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, also used the prison to detain dissidents. What's particularly chilling is the lack of accountability. Torture is routine, and deaths in custody are common. Inmates are often forgotten by the outside world, left to endure unimaginable suffering. 10th Grand Valley Institution, Ontario, Canada. Grand Valley Institution for Women, GVI, in Kitchener, Ontario, is one of Canada's federal women's prisons, and it has a history that's both interesting and tragic. Opened in 1997, it was built to replace the infamous Prison for Women in Kingston. This is Ontario's only federal women's prison, designed for inmates serving sentences longer than 2 years. The setup here is a bit different from what you might imagine. Most prisoners live in small cottages instead of traditional cells. It sounds nice on paper, but the reality is more complex. There's also a secure unit for inmates in segregation, or those classified as maximum security. These prisoners live in small pods, with limited interaction with others. One of the darkest chapters in GVI's history is the case of Ashley Smith. In 2007, this 19-year-old died by self-strangulation while prison staff stood by, an incident that sparked national outrage and led to calls for systemic reform. It highlighted major issues like inadequate mental health support and staff training. 11th. Parapana Agrahara Central Prison, India. Parapana Agrahara Central Prison in Karnataka, India, is one of the country's most overcrowded and challenging facilities. Designed to hold about 2,200 inmates, it currently houses over 4,400. This massive overcrowding has turned it into a chaotic environment where basic necessities like food, water, and medical care are stretched thin. In the female wing, conditions aren't much better. Women inmates face cramped living spaces with up to 8 or 9 prisoners sharing a single room. Hygiene is a constant struggle, and access to medical care is inadequate, leaving inmates vulnerable to illnesses that often go untreated. The overcrowding isn't just a logistical issue. It also leads to mental stress among inmates and staff. With so many people crammed into a space meant for half that number, tensions run high, and violence isn't uncommon. Despite its size, the prison lacks the resources to provide proper rehabilitation programs, leaving inmates without the support they need to reintegrate into society. 12. Pollsmoor Prison, South Africa. Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town is infamous as one of South Africa's toughest correctional facilities. Opened in 1964, it was initially designed to hold about 4,300 inmates, but now houses over 7,000. The overcrowding is staggering, with many prisoners crammed into communal cells meant for far fewer people. The prison has 5 main sections, including a female prison that holds women and even some infants. Life here is incredibly harsh. Most inmates spend nearly all day in overcrowded cells, with just 1 hour of outdoor time in enclosed courtyards. However, even this time isn't used for exercise. Gang leaders often use it to communicate, punish, or exchange contraband. Gangsterism is a significant issue at Pollsmoor. The prison is home to notorious gangs like the 26s, 27s, and 28s, collectively known as the Numbers. These gangs run much of the prison's daily life, enforcing brutal rules and even engaging in extreme violence, including sexual violence. For many inmates, leaving the gang culture is nearly impossible, as their ranks are tattooed onto their bodies, marking them for life. If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into important topics. And let us know in the comments, did any of these stories surprise or shock you the most?